Hello and welcome back to the channel. You may remember a few days ago I put out a video which from Bernard, I think it was, who sent to me and told me about the increase in fees for the canals, the continuous cruising boaters who are on the canal network here in Great Britain. And the amount of views that this video got and the interest and the replies, the comments, and of course the emails have been quite extensive, that I thought I would follow it up. Firstly, to say thanks to Bernard and everybody who got in touch and told me about some of the plight and the difficulties that you're going through. Canals and that boating on those canals, as I said in my previous video, I have done several times. I actually have a very lovely affinity with that. And I think that anybody looking for an alternative type of life, getting away from that 9 to 5 type of thing, or you've worked all your life, you've saved up, and the dream is to get back to nature, to float on the nation's wonderful canal network, that doesn't seem to be being looked after as it ought to by a charity that is there to do just that, and we'll question that charity status in a minute. It has, as I say, it's got a huge affinity to me, and I've been on it, and the boaters are the most nicest, kindest people that I've met. It is a slow sort of life. It is a contemplative life. You're there with nature. You're moving about if you're a continuous boater, or if you live on a marina, you may be based in one place and then go off to work, or not, as the case may be, and then you may go off for cruises and things like that. It is an alternative way to life, and to be honest with you, these days, anything that is an alternative and joyous way of living has got to be encouraged, I think. However, it does seem that the powers that be, or the powers that ought not be, this corporate Britain, is very hard on anybody looking for an alternative way, a sort of free life, a way to have your own individual thoughts and basically to be happy and content, which does seem to be somewhat of a worry. And of course, that's basically what my channel has been looking at over the last 12 months, is this pressure that has been put on and the penal systems that have been engaged on people just wanting to thrive and enjoy themselves. So I thought what would be interesting is to look at just a small section of comments that have come back to me via email, and also the so-called charity status of the so-called Canal and Rivers Trust. And we'll have a look at that in a minute. So let's go, first of all, I'm indebted to George, who sent me a number of emails, but a lot of people did, about the situation. So let's just have a quick look at some of these. So first of all, this is from George, who angrily, I think, says that since the continuous cruising guidance was launched in October 2004, we have witnessed the board, this will be the board of the CRT, relying upon this invented instrument to introduce vexatious injustices for the boat owner. Now, this mentality has allowed itself to develop over many years, the PSYOP brainwashing operation, which hasn't helped resolve the perceived problems that the board spends so much of its time and resources contemplating. Whether you like it or not, this latest license consultation is solely for the board to deliver more draconian policies to further this despicable continuous cruising argumentum ad hominem. Strong words there from George, but he is not alone. Let's have a look from an email from Jackie, and she says, in the last year, we Bristol boaters, who have over the last few years been organising ourselves into a coordinated group, the Bristol Boaters, and you can find them at bristolboaters.org, have been challenging Bristol City Council and the Harbour Authority over a huge hike in mooring fees, filling papers for a judicial review, not accepted, on the grounds that they did not do any sort of impacts assessment or user consultation before hiking the prices. Some people have had to abandon their boats due to the fee increase, and others are still seeking clarification on some absurd and unfulfillable clauses in the extended mooring licence documents, which relate to all sorts of aspects, including the use of fuel stoves, transfer of moorings, even on privately managed club pontoons, and even dancing on our own decks. I mean, can you imagine it? There you are, having a wonderful life. What could be more lovely than dancing on your own deck? You know, you've got a glass of wine, you're enjoying the nature, you're there, there's nobody about, and you're dancing on your own deck and they don't like it. What bizarre world we live in. She goes on, Martin Reeves, Mayor of the Bristol City Council, has referred to us boaters as the privileged few, and a widespread belief held by those in authority seems to be that boaters are the users, so that we should provide the lion's share of the finance for maintaining the historic harbour of Bristol, a key destination asset enjoyed by millions of city dwellers and visitors every year. And to be honest with you, it is lovely if you go to a harbour or a marina to see life, you know, people living. Those people who visit that area, whether they be from the city itself or outside the area, and come in, there's nothing nicer, I find, if I'm visiting or walking along the towpath, to have a chat to some of the boaters, to inquire about their lifestyle, to see them inside their boats or sitting on the deck, and have a pleasant talk to them about what life is like. It's very encouraging, it's inspiring, and it's nice to see. So quite why these people would be penalised for effectively carrying on a tradition, a historic tradition in this country of keeping these places alive. Because after all, if it wasn't for the boaters, these canals would be filled in, as I've seen in the history when I've made my documentary, An Abandoned Canal, about the Shrewsbury and Newport Trust that's trying to put that back into water, and they're raising money and doing the best they can to do that. I'm going back, I think, in March to do an update and do a video about it, which I will put on the channel. Anyway, so thank you, Jackie, for that information. A third email that I'm going to present to you now is from Anne. And if I can just get this system to work properly, she says the following. She says, there is certainly plenty for the NABO, which is the National Association of Boat Owners, to hold the Canal and Rivers Trust to account about. Their money wasting is astounding. They've lost £167 million this year, but are still employing yet more highly paid execs who, of course, need their support staff too, rather than cutting back. CRT rely so heavily on the goodwill of their volunteers, who are now pushing back at the way that they're being asked to do more and more of the work that actual employees should be doing. Now, I'll just interrupt this email here at this point to say that when Julia and I have been on the canals, we've passed many of the CRT volunteers, unpaid. They just love doing what they do. They open the locks, they help people through, they teach newbies who are on the canals for perhaps a holiday how the locks work and how the system works. It can be a bit daunting. There is a specific way of going through the locks. You're moving the water across. You don't want to waste it, and if you can get one or more boats, or two or more boats into a lock at once, you're saving the water that's constantly moving down through the locks, because canals are pretty static otherwise. And as you go through the lock into the pound, which is the section of canal between the locks, the water is moving. And of course, in certain times of the year, there is less water around if you've had a bit of a drought. So it is good. But a lot of this work, as it says here, is done by volunteers. But if they're being given more and more work to do than actually employees should be doing, but are not, I don't blame the volunteers to be pushing back, especially as we look at the status of this charity in a minute, and then you can ask yourself whether these volunteers ought to be paid anyway. But we'll carry on with this email. We're nearly at the end of it. The CRT's fundraising capabilities, activities have lost millions over the years, with no sign of that changing. But it's much easier for the Canal River Trust to increase charges to boaters, marinas and private moorings and boat-related businesses with above inflation rise promised for the next 5 years. The surcharge to the CCER, as the canal users, I suppose that is, won't bring very much into the coffers, but will add 33% to their licence from 2022 to 2024. And this is often the most vulnerable, low-income group of boaters. CRT's answer is they can all go on benefits. Well, that's, what a nice, kind response that is. Emergency stoppages, especially on the northern canals, are increasing year on year as maintenance falls further behind. With Parry, who I believe is the CEO of the trust, I don't know his first name, threatening the whole canal closures in the future if the government don't give them more money. I helped initiate Fund Britain's Waterways, and there's a link here, waterways.org.uk, Fund Britain's Waterways, but made it very clear to Mr. Parry that with no alternative authority in the offing, any success must see the extra money being spent on maintenance rather than being frittered away. Quite how we hold the Canal River Trust to this, I am not sure. Maybe you could consider following up your video with a probing interview with Mr. Parry. And that was from Anne. And I would be more than happy to talk to the CEO of the Canal and Rivers Trust to talk about their funding issues and why it is that they're penalising and increasing the fees on the continuous boaters and the others on the river, on the canals and rivers up and down this land. More than happy to do that. If you would like to come on the show, you're very welcome. I'd love to discuss that with you. And I know from when Julia and I went on recently on the Kennet Navan, I can't remember if I mentioned this, that the state of the canal locks westward from Newbury was quite atrocious. We found difficulty opening some of the locks. There was a huge amount of leakages going on. And many of these, although they were being emergency fixed, during the winter period, that's the time when traditionally I understand that they would change some of the lock gates and things. And in my previous video, The Abandoned Canal, I did talk to some of them. That was made 10 years ago. And as I remember it, it only just changed from British Waterways to the Canal and Rivers Trust. And I think there was great hope. But it seems that the Canal and Rivers Trust is possibly not what it seems. For George sent me this illuminating website, which challenges the status of it. Let's have a look. This is from narrowboatworld.com, and I'll leave the link in the description and you can have a look at this yourselves. Published on the 1st of March this year. Canal and River Trust is not a charity. That was news to me. Canal and River Trust, it says here, their registration with the Charity Commission in 2012, which was around about, as I say, when I made my abandoned video originally, was accepted on the basis that it was independent from the government. However, it has subsequently been decided it is a public, non-financial corporation. Notice that word there. Corporation, a for-profit business. It has been under government control for the last 10 years. Alan Richards lifts the lid on the charity that is not a charity but a government body. So here we go. And this is the bit that I found most interesting. Office of National Statistics. On behalf of the government, the Office of the National Statistics, the ONS, determines whether organisations are in the public or private sector and whether they are market or non-market producers. The ONS has determined that the Canals and River Trust is a market producer and falls within the public sector. Canal and River Trust is categorised as a public non-financial corporation. Non-financial in this context means that the CRT is not a bank or a similar institution. Now that is interesting because it does seem that they are acting in that fashion, in the way that they're putting their fees up. Now, it'd be interesting for people to go and have a look at that and understand it fully. Now, I'm not an expert in any of this. I'm just an enthusiast who occasionally manages to afford to go on or hire a boat from a friend of mine on the canals, and we love it, and it's a lovely way of life, and this is something that has to be preserved. There is a fantastic book by C.R. What's his name? Rolt. I forget his name. I've got it. I've read it. It's Narrowboat, and it was written around in the 1960s, if I remember, but based on the sort of 40s to 50s, in which the canals were at their last ebb, and he takes a trip just before the canals were dying from their traditional industrial use for the mills and carrying, as I said before, sort of the coal and aggregate and farming stuff up and down the countryside by horse and then slowly by diesel. And as that fell into disuse, as the motorways became the more relevant way and the factories no longer sited themselves by the canals but actually moved into different places and the road system took off, the old canal systems died and many of them collapsed and fell into disuse. But then in the 1960s and 70s, the leisure industry took up the mantle, and many volunteer groups raised the funds and put these canals back into water. And people, of course, have been using this for leisure, and people have been moving on to them. And it's a fantastic tradition from the beginning, really, of the Industrial Revolution. And we've got to save this. And so in came the British Waterways to sort of help this, as there was clearly a demand for help, and something that was bringing income into the government, of course, in the way of taxes and keeping businesses at the side of these canals afloat, which is very important. The pubs that were falling into disuse, originally used by the industrial boaters up and down, now being used in leisure, and the whole industry, the leisure industry. But it's not just boats, the canal boats, the narrow boats and the wide beam boats, of course. There are all sorts of people using the rivers and the canals for sailing, canoeing, for swimming, all sorts of things. And they all contribute a little bit to keep this wonderful leisure and fun activity. And of course, the towpaths are being used by all sorts as a mode to keep fit and keep going. And the canals, they weave through the towns and the cities, the open countryside, and offers a huge amount of fun and recreation for people. And we've got to keep these things going. But it isn't just solely on those boaters who use the canals. So it's an interesting situation. So I'm very grateful for everybody who got in touch and has been keeping this conversation alive. And I'll be interested as we go on into the new year what happens and how we call to account these charities that are not charities and seem to be actually more of corporate Britain penalising people who just want to thrive and live and have, in many cases, an alternative life. They've saved up and they've put their savings, or perhaps they cannot buy a brick and mortar building and prefer to invest in the British waterways. And I applaud all of those people, and I am really gutted to hear what has been happened. So please keep up the support if you can. Thank you for watching. I appreciate all the feedback. Take care, and good luck to everybody who is looking for an alternative to the 9 to 5 enslaved way of living that we have. But I think things will be changing in this year. So good luck to everybody.